Mr. President, here's where we are. The Republicans are holding the government spending bill and the tax break bill for businesses hostage unless they can attach a rider to these bills to allow big oil to export American oil overseas to the highest foreign bidder. 10 days before Christmas, Republicans want to give big oil the biggest of all Christmas presents by lifting the crude oil export ban. And they keep saying no to long-term extensions of the wind and solar tax breaks and protections for consumers as part of the deal. Lifting the oil export ban would be a disaster for our economy, for our climate, for our national security. We should have tax break parity. Let me just tell you where we are right now. In America, the oil industry gets approximately $7 to $8 billion a year that it gives to the oil industry every year. $7 to $8 billion in tax breaks. Well, it's interesting because $7 to $8 billion is what the wind and solar industry receive each year. Pretty even. Wind and solar, oil. $7, $8 billion every year in tax breaks. Now, you keep hearing from the other side, let's have a level playing field. Let's have all of the above. Well, what are they asking for right now? Here's what they're asking for. The oil tax breaks will continue forever. Forever. And the wind and solar tax breaks will phase out over the next 3 to 5 years. Now, this is on top of the windfall which the oil industry receives from the exportation of the oil, which otherwise would stay here in the United States. So, under that scenario, the losers are going to be U.S. consumers because we'll be exporting the oil that's already here in our own ground so that the oil industry can get a higher price overseas. It'll hurt our national security because we still import 5 million barrels of oil per day. Can I say that again? We still import 5 million barrels of oil a day. We still import 25% of all of our oil. Some of the countries that we import that oil from, you may have heard of: Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iraq, Algeria, Nigeria. We're still importing oil. And we're still exporting young men and women in uniform over to the Middle East to protect those cargo ships of oil, bringing it back into the United States. We don't have a surplus of oil in the United States. We have a deficit of 5 million barrels of oil per day. So that's a dangerous policy. And I'll just say on top of that, that the whole ethanol subsidy program in the United States is premised upon the fact that we do not have energy independence. And we need ethanol to get $1.3 billion worth of tax breaks a year, biodiesel. Well, that whole program starts to get called into question if we already are going to declare energy independence here, even as we still import 5 million barrels a day. Our domestic refiners will be hurt by this unless there's proper protections built in the tax code for those refiners. Otherwise, as that crude oil goes overseas, it's going to call into jeopardy the viability of the oil refineries across the East Coast, Midwest, and West Coast of the United States of America. On the environment, if Brookings Institute is correct, and upwards of 3 million barrels of oil are being exported by the year 2025, well, that's the equivalent of 150 coal-burning plants of additional pollution going up from our own soil. Now, some people question, well, will that really happen? Well, let me give you some other numbers. The Energy Information Agency says that the developing world and its expanding economy is going to require 10 million additional barrels of oil by the year 2025. The expanding economy is going to require 20 million barrels of new oil by the year 2035. So what big oil in America wants, they want a piece of that action. They want to be able to export into that market. And they will do so by drilling on American soil, but not to reduce our own dependence upon imported oil, but to sell it because the price on the global market is higher, much higher than the price they could get here in America. Is that really a good policy, given what we're seeing about the stability of the Saudi government? Well, just look at governments all across the Middle East from which we import oil. Is this really a good idea? I don't think so. I think it goes to the heart of our national security. So what happens to the big oil industry is over the next 20 years, they pick up about $500 billion in new tax revenues. That's with a B, $500 billion. They keep their $7 billion tax breaks every year over a 20-year period. That's $140 billion more. And meanwhile, the solar and wind tax breaks expire. They run out. And they run out over, for wind, the rumors are, 3 years. Well, for the young generation here, they're the green generation. They think wind and solar are the future. They don't think fossil fuels are the future. The whole world, 195 countries, just gathered and signed an agreement to move away from a fossil era to a low-carbon, clean energy future. So if there was going to be a deal out here, then there should be some equality. If you don't take away the tax breaks for oil and gas, then don't take away the tax breaks for wind and solar. A level playing field, all of the above. Have a competition so that we can know at the end of the day, which is what I think is going to happen, that renewables are actually the future. So it's a tale of two tax breaks. One for big oil, one for the renewable industry. And so as I stand out here, this is still an unanswered question. But I do know this, that the Republicans are pledging that if their president wins, their presidential candidate wins in 2016, then in 2017, that presidential candidate is going to take the clean power rules that President Obama has promulgated off the books. They're going to review the fuel economy standards that pushes us towards 54.5 miles per gallon by the year 2025, which is still the largest single reduction in greenhouse gases in one stroke that any country in the world has ever actually announced. And they're also saying, obviously this week, that they're going to allow the wind and solar tax breaks to expire. So just as the world meets, we have the announcements about what their goals are on this issue. And I just think that the world expects more from us, but I actually think the young people of our country expect more from us. They really think this is the future. This is the revolution. More efficient vehicles, power plants that have fewer emissions, tax breaks for wind and solar, for fuel cells, the future. Not having 150 new power plant of coal equivalents of oil being drilled for in our country without some corresponding permanent long-term tax breaks for that which would offset it. No, it's just the opposite. They're saying we're coming after the presidential election for the reductions in greenhouse gases from power plants. We'll take those rules off the books. We're going to review the fuel economy standards. We'll take those off the books. And we'll make sure that there's never again a permanent tax break for wind and solar. That's where we are. In the same week that the world just met in Paris to announce a global solution to a global warming problem. So I say equality. I say keep it the same. If you want to keep oil, you want to keep natural gas tax breaks, keep them. But don't take away ours. That is not mine, but those that believe in a low-carbon, clean energy future for our planet, and that the United States must be the leader. We're the innovation giant. We're the country that the world is looking for in order to find these solutions. We passed laws that created this cell phone in 1996. Up until then, it was the size of a brick and people didn't have one in their pocket. And then 8 years later, a new cell phone came along. And by the way, 600 million people in Africa have them because we innovated. We went first. We can do the same thing in the energy sector. But there has to be some fair treatment that is put in place, especially when the oil industry receives such an incredible bonanza of breaks here, $500 billion in new revenues, undermining our national security from my perspective because we shouldn't be exporting oil when we're still importing it from dangerous places on the planet, and they keep all of their tax breaks. So from my perspective, I look at the Republican mantra from 6 or 7 years ago. It was drill here, drill now, pay less. What they were saying is the more we drill here is the more energy independence we're going to have. They're replacing it here this week with drill here, export there, pay more here at home. That is their new slogan. Everything that they had said about why we should be drilling here is now made obsolete by their commitment to now ensuring that oil gets exported. And by the way, there's two prices. There's an OPEC price for global oil, and there's a Texas price for American oil. And it's always cheaper here. And they want to get it off into ships to get the OPEC price on the global market. I understand that. But I don't understand is how we can leave behind with tax breaks that are phasing out. And the rumors are that the wind tax break expires just over the next 3 years. Those new technologies that are branded made in America, like these cell phone technologies, like these smartphone technologies that have revolutionized countries and continents all across the planet. So I just, come out here to say that I understand why big oil wants this. It's just about as great a Christmas gift as any industry would ever have received. But in return, I just hope, before we adjourn, that we can find a way of being more generous, much more generous, to those other companies, those other technologies that are the future, and that the promises that Republican presidential candidates are making that they're going to come back and take the clean power plant rules off the books are protected because we've got the tax breaks that still signal to industries that they are the future. And the past is just a memory. And that there is a new 21st century vision that America is going to lead, and that the promises that President Obama made in Paris on behalf of the American people are, in fact, going to be met, and that our policies are going to reflect the words that the President spoke.